A disappointing welcome. The scorching California sun glared down on the gleaming windshields of the luxury cars parked outside one of Los Angeles's most prestigious car dealerships. Inside, the temperature was cool, but the air was thick with an atmosphere of wealth, exclusivity, and silent judgments. It was the kind of place where high-profile executives, celebrities, and tech moguls strolled in with ease, wielding power and privilege like an accessory. For those who belonged, the dealership's doors opened with a smile. For those who didn't, they remained tightly closed. Renee Marshall, however, wasn't someone who needed permission. She walked in with a natural confidence, her elegant white blouse and tailored black pants fitting perfectly on her frame. Her dark, radiant skin shone under the showroom lights, and her presence commanded attention, though not always the kind she deserved. Her stride was firm, her head held high, and her eyes filled with determination. Renee was here to make a significant purchase, a reward she had promised herself after years of hard work and perseverance. But as Renee stepped through the door, the usual hum of activity in the dealership seemed to stutter. Eyes drifted toward her, appraising her presence with silent curiosity. The receptionist at the front desk, a young woman with a perfectly manicured appearance, barely glanced up from her computer. Instead, her gaze flickered over Renee with a cool indifference, and she continued typing without a second look. Renee noticed the subtle slight but brushed it off. She wasn't here for anyone's approval. Her eyes swept across the showroom floor, taking in the sleek black Ferraris, the newest Tesla Roadster, and a stunning array of Mercedes-Benz vehicles that lined the room like soldiers ready for inspection. She had her heart set on a particular model, a brand-new Mercedes-AMG GT, a car that would embody her success and strength. Before she could make her way over to the car, a voice cut through the silence. "Can I help you?" Renee turned to see a tall, sharply dressed man in a fitted navy suit approaching her. He exuded confidence, but his polite smile barely masked a hint of disdain. Jason, as his name tag read, was a senior sales associate and one of the top sellers at the dealership. He prided himself on his ability to read people quickly, and he'd already decided what category Renee fell into. "Yes," Renee replied, keeping her tone even. "I'd like to inquire about the new Mercedes-AMG GT." Jason's smile widened, but it wasn't one of warmth. It was the type of smile people wore when they thought they were being clever. He quickly glanced back toward his colleagues, who were watching with mild interest from a distance. "Ah, the AMG GT," he said, drawing out the name as if savoring it. "That's quite a car. Are you sure it's the right choice?" Renee felt a twinge of irritation, but she kept her composure. "I know exactly what I'm looking for," she replied calmly. "And I'd like to take it for a test drive, if possible." Jason's expression flickered with surprise for a brief moment before settling back into a practiced neutrality. "I'm afraid we don't just let anyone test drive that model," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "There are verification steps we need to follow." Renee's heart clenched, not with hurt but with a familiar frustration. She had encountered this attitude before, this assumption that she didn't belong in certain places or deserve certain things. But today, she wasn't here to be dismissed or disregarded. She had worked too hard, overcome too many obstacles, to let someone like Jason make her feel unworthy. "Verification," she echoed, raising an eyebrow. "And what exactly does that entail?" Jason's lips twitched, and he turned slightly to glance at his colleagues, who were now openly smirking. One of them whispered, loud enough for Renee to hear, "Does she even know how much that car costs?" The word hung in the air, thick with judgment and contempt. Renee could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on her, trying to shrink her spirit. But instead of cowering, she let a quiet strength rise within her. She had faced challenges far greater than this: loss, discrimination, and the relentless demands of climbing the corporate ladder in an industry that didn't always welcome her. After a moment, she responded, her voice calm but firm. "I understand perfectly. But I assure you, I'm more than capable of handling this purchase." Jason's smug expression faltered for a split second before he recovered. He chuckled, as if amused by her persistence, and then motioned towards the door. "We have other models that might be more fitting for your needs," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Renee remained still, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not leaving," she replied, her voice carrying a strength that silenced the room. "I'll be test driving that car today, and I'll be doing so with someone who knows how to treat their clients with respect." The murmurs that had filled the room earlier ceased entirely. The sales associates who had been smirking now exchanged nervous glances, and Jason's confident demeanor began to crumble. He looked around, realizing that he was the one being scrutinized now, his every word and action under a magnifying glass. Before he could stammer out a response, the door to a glass-walled office at the back of the showroom opened. A man with salt and pepper hair and a tailored gray suit emerged, his expression one of curiosity mixed with slight annoyance at the commotion. His nameplate read Stephen Marcus, General Manager. Stephen strode over, his polished demeanor barely concealing a look of disapproval aimed at Jason. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, his voice calm but authoritative. Jason quickly composed himself, forcing a polite smile. "Oh, no issue, sir," he began, but Renee didn't let him continue. "The issue, Mr. Marcus," Renee interjected, her voice unwavering, "is that I came here to buy a car, a luxury car, and I was treated as though I didn't belong. Your employee here has made it abundantly clear that he thinks I shouldn't be in this dealership." The weight of her words lingered in the air, and for a brief moment, the room was silent, every eye focused on Renee. There was power in her calm, the quiet strength of someone who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to demand the respect she deserved. Stephen's gaze shifted from Renee to Jason, his expression growing colder. "Is that so?" he asked, his voice now tinged with a hardness that sent a chill down Jason's spine. Jason stammered, his confidence now thoroughly shaken. I didn't mean," he began, but he could already feel the ground slipping out from under him. Renee remained silent, her eyes locked on Stephen, silently daring him to make this moment right. She had endured enough indignities in her life to know that this one didn't deserve her forgiveness. This time, she wouldn't walk away quietly. Stephen cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "Ms. Marshall, I apologize for any misunderstanding. We strive for excellence in customer service here, and it's clear that we've fallen short of that standard today. If you'll allow me, I'd be honored to assist you personally." Renee looked at him for a long moment, gauging his sincerity, before giving a slight nod. She wasn't done here, and she knew she had the upper hand. As Stephen led her toward his office, she felt the eyes of every employee and customer on her, watching as she claimed her place in a space they had tried to deny her. Today, she would leave this dealership with more than just a car. She would leave with her dignity intact and a reminder to everyone watching that respect wasn't a privilege. It was her right. The power of composure. Renee followed Stephen into his office, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. The glass-walled room provided a sweeping view of the showroom, where sleek, high-end vehicles gleamed under bright lights, each car more luxurious than the last. Yet, for all the extravagance surrounding her, Renee's mind was sharply focused on the slight she had just experienced. As she settled into the chair across from Stephen's desk, she could feel the weight of the situation. She knew that this moment was not only about purchasing a car, but about standing up for herself. And, in a way, for others who had been subtly dismissed or disrespected in places where they were supposed to belong. This was bigger than just one dealership. This was about challenging an entrenched system of assumptions and prejudices. Stephen adjusted his tie, a slight sheen of discomfort in his eyes as he glanced at Renee. He cleared his throat, his demeanor poised but noticeably tense. "Ms. Marshall, I'd like to apologize again for what happened out there." It's clear that Jason's approach was less than professional, he began, choosing his words carefully. At this dealership, we strive to treat every customer with respect and dignity. Renee tilted her head slightly, watching him with an unreadable expression. Is that so? She replied, her tone calm, but laced with an undercurrent of challenge. Because I didn't feel respected. I felt judged the moment I walked in. And I doubt I'm the first person who's been treated this way here. Stephen shifted uncomfortably. I understand, Ms. Marshall, he stammered, visibly struggling to maintain his composure under her steady gaze. You have my assurance that this was an isolated incident, and we'll be addressing it appropriately. Renee raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Mr. Marcus, with all due respect, I've spent years in corporate settings. I can tell when someone's just saying what they think I want to hear, she said, her voice soft yet unyielding. I don't need placating words. What I want is to be treated as a valued customer, not as someone whose presence needs to be tolerated. Stephen exhaled, momentarily at a loss for words. Renee's forthrightness had him cornered, and he realized there was no way out except to confront the uncomfortable truth. He glanced down at his hands, then looked up, meeting her eyes with a newfound resolve. You're right, he admitted, a trace of humility in his voice. Sometimes, assumptions are made, and they're wrong. I can't change what happened, but I can offer you my personal commitment that your experience here will reflect the respect you deserve. And if it's all right with you, I'd like to start fresh, beginning with the test drive you requested. Renee considered his words, her expression softening slightly. This was the moment she had been waiting for, a genuine acknowledgement, not only of her individual worth, but also of the need for change. She nodded slowly. That sounds fair, Mr. Marcus. I appreciate your willingness to address this. Stephen visibly relaxed, offering a small appreciative smile. Thank you, Ms. Marshall. I'll have the car brought around immediately. He rose from his chair, extending his hand in a gesture of sincerity, which Renee accepted, shaking it firmly. As they left the office, Stephen spoke briefly to a younger salesperson, who promptly went to arrange the test drive. Renee followed Stephen across the showroom floor, feeling the curious stares of the other employees and customers. Jason, the senior salesperson who had dismissed her earlier, was nowhere to be seen. She suspected he was hiding somewhere, smarting from the reprimand he no doubt received. Minutes later, a silver Mercedes-AMG GT was brought to the entrance of the dealership. Its sleek lines and polished exterior caught the sunlight, casting a shimmering glow across its metallic surface. It was an exquisite machine, powerful, elegant, and unmistakably bold. It was exactly what Renee wanted, a car that mirrored her strength and determination. Stephen opened the passenger door for her. If you'd like, I can accompany you on the test drive, Ms. Marshall, or I can have one of my team members join you, he offered, his tone courteous. Renee thought for a moment, then gave a small nod. You can join me, Mr. Marcus. I'd like to hear more about the features directly from someone in charge. He nodded and settled into the passenger seat, buckling his seatbelt as Renee adjusted her mirrors and steering wheel. The interior of the AMG GT was a marvel of luxury, its seats crafted from supple leather and its dashboard lined with high-tech displays. Renee's hands gripped the wheel. Feeling the car's subtle vibrations under her fingertips, she could sense the power waiting beneath her touch, ready to roar to life. As she started the engine, the car's deep, resonant hum filled the air, a sound that was both thrilling and soothing. She shifted into drive, guiding the car smoothly out of the dealership and onto the open road. With each turn, she tested its handling, its responsiveness, and its power. She pushed the accelerator, feeling the engines might surge as the car glided effortlessly along the highway. Stephen watched her, impressed by her skillful control and precision. You seem to know your way around high-performance vehicles, he commented, his tone genuinely admiring. Renee gave a small, knowing smile. I've worked hard to get to where I am, Mr. Marcus. I've earned the right to enjoy life's finer things, and I know when something feels right. She glanced at him briefly before returning her focus to the road. This car, it feels right. Stephen nodded thoughtfully, absorbing her words. There was something undeniably powerful about her presence, a quiet strength that he hadn't fully appreciated until now. It wasn't just her confidence, it was the way she held herself, as though she was grounded by her own self-worth, immune to the judgments of others. They drove in silence for a few moments, the wind rushing past as they cruised along the coastal highway. The dealership and its atmosphere of quiet prejudice felt miles away, replaced by the open road and the endless sky above. Here, Renee was free. Free from the assumptions, the whispered judgments, and the silent barriers that people like Jason had tried to impose on her. After the test drive, Renee parked the AMG GT back at the dealership, savoring the feeling of accomplishment that had settled in her chest. She knew this car would soon be hers, a testament to her perseverance and success. As she and Stephen exited the car, she noticed Jason lingering by the entrance, his expression subdued and his gaze averted. Stephen turned to her, extending his hand once more. "Ms. Marshall, it's been an honor assisting you today. Please let me know if there's anything else I can do to make your experience here exceptional." Renee shook his hand, her grip firm. "Thank you, Mr. Marcus. I appreciate everything you've done today." Her gaze shifted momentarily to Jason, who had glanced up, catching her eye. She held his gaze, her expression steady, and gave him a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of her resilience, a reminder of the strength he had underestimated. As Stephen led her back to the office to finalize the paperwork, Renee felt a surge of pride. She had walked into that dealership as a customer, and she was leaving it as someone who had commanded respect, not by changing who she was, but by standing unapologetically firm in her identity. And for anyone who tried to dismiss her again, she had no need for revenge or anger. Her success, and the car she was about to drive home, was response enough. A message of unseen strength. Renee sat back in the leather chair in Stephen's office, waiting as he completed the final arrangements for her purchase. The paperwork lay before her, and with each pen stroke, she could feel the closing of a chapter, one that had opened with subtle prejudice, but was ending with her victorious reclamation of dignity. Stephen handed her a folder with the contract details, his demeanor markedly respectful. He was a man who understood business, and perhaps now, a bit more about the strength of character and resilience. "Ms. Marshall, it's been an honor serving you today. I truly hope this car brings you as much pride as you've shown us today." "Thank you, Stephen," Renee replied, her voice calm yet resonating with an underlying strength. "I do believe it will." As she gathered her belongings, Renee noticed the group of employees who had laughed and smirked earlier now lingering nearby, their expressions ranging from shame to respect. Jason, the senior salesman, stood at the back, arms crossed, his face stony but with a touch of apprehension. She felt his gaze on her, filled with a mix of resentment and perhaps a glimmer of newfound understanding. Pausing, Renee decided to turn this moment into something beyond her personal victory. She walked toward the cluster of employees, each of whom straightened at her approach. The air around them shifted, the lightness of their earlier mockery now replaced with a weight they all seemed to feel. She addressed them, her voice soft but unbreakable. "There's something I want you all to know," she began, her gaze sweeping across the faces that had once dismissed her. "Every day, people walk into places like this, hoping to be treated with the respect they deserve, regardless of how they look, dress, or the assumptions others make about them. Every day, people are judged before they're even given a chance to prove who they are, or what they're capable of." Jason's jaw tightened, and he looked away, but Renee's gaze lingered on him before she continued. "Today, I experienced that firsthand here, and it hurt. But I'm not here to demand an apology. I'm here because it's time we all do better. When you look at someone, see more than what's on the surface. Look for the strength, the dignity, and the worth that exists in everyone who walks through those doors." Her word hung in the air, resonating in the quiet showroom, where the sound of ticking clocks and soft murmurs had ceased altogether. Each employee seemed caught in a moment of self-reflection, seeing her not just as a customer, but as a voice for countless others they may have dismissed unknowingly. Some of them, especially the younger sales associates, nodded slowly as though a veil had been lifted. But Jason, unwilling to let her message settle without resistance, spoke up, his tone still edged with bitterness. With all due respect, Ms. Marshall, not everyone who walks in here is looking to make a purchase. We have to make judgments every day. And sometimes, we're just being cautious. Renee held his gaze, unflinching. Caution is one thing, Jason. Prejudice is another. You dismissed me without hearing a single word I had to say, and in that moment, you stripped me of the dignity every human being deserves. Imagine if someone did that to you every time you tried to move forward in life. Would you still be cautious, or would you be hurt? Jason swallowed, his face paling as the reality of her words sank in. He seemed to shrink under her unwavering stare, realizing the depth of the message she was delivering, not only to him, but to everyone in earshot. Stephen, who had been watching the exchange silently, placed a hand on Renee's shoulder. Ms. Marshall, you've given us all something important to think about today. I assure you, your words won't be forgotten. Renee nodded, her purpose fulfilled, knowing she had done more than simply buy a car. She had planted a seed of change. She could see it in their eyes, the way some avoided her gaze out of shame, while others looked on with newfound admiration. It was a moment of reckoning that extended far beyond her personal experience. In her heart, she knew that she was standing on the shoulders of many who had been in her position, those who had remained silent, accepting the unfair treatment as an unfortunate part of life. Today, she was their voice. As she turned to leave, Jason spoke again, this time with a note of contrition. Ms. Marshall, he said quietly, the arrogance in his tone replaced by an unmistakable humility. I didn't see you. I mean, not the way I should have. Renee paused, considering his words. A part of her wanted to keep walking, to let him sit with his guilt. But another part of her, the part that believed in growth and change, chose a different path. She looked at him, a faint but genuine smile softening her features. We all have blind spots, Jason, she replied. What matters is that we're willing to learn and grow from them. Her words held no malice, only a quiet wisdom, one that reached across the boundaries of resentment and pride. Jason nodded, visibly humbled, his gaze meeting hers with newfound respect. Thank you, he murmured, the sincerity in his voice carrying the weight of an unspoken promise. She nodded in acknowledgement, feeling a quiet satisfaction in knowing that this small act of grace might one day ripple outward. With that, Renee exited the dealership, her stride filled with purpose, her head held high. She felt the California sun warm her skin as she stepped outside, a symbolic contrast to the cool indifference she'd first encountered within the showroom. Today, she had not only reclaimed her dignity, but had also given those who'd witnessed her strength a chance to reflect, to become better versions of themselves. She approached the silver Mercedes-AMG GT that now awaited her, the keys in her hand, a tangible symbol of her resilience. As she slipped into the driver's seat and closed the door, she felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. She started the engine, its powerful hum filling her with a newfound confidence that transcended material possessions. As she drove away, Renee's thoughts drifted to others like herself, those who had faced quiet biases in places that promised luxury and acceptance. She knew she couldn't change the world in one day, but today she had made a difference, however small. She had challenged assumptions and shattered the barriers that attempted to define her worth. Renee's phone chimed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from her best friend, Carla, who had always been her confidant and support system. How did it go? Did you get the car? Carla's words danced across the screen, filled with curiosity and concern. Renee smiled as she typed back, Got the car, and then some. I'll tell you all about it over dinner. She pressed send, the satisfaction in her chest growing. Today, she had not only purchased a car, but had also made an impact that went far beyond a luxury showroom. She had shown that strength wasn't just about pushing through, but about standing tall in the face of adversity, daring others to see her for who she truly was. As she cruised down the coastal highway, her reflection in the rearview mirror caught her eye. There, looking back at her, was not just the accomplished woman she had become, but the resilient young girl she once was. The girl who had promised herself that she would rise above every hurdle, every bias, every sneer. Renee whispered softly to herself, "This is just the beginning." An unbreakable spirit. As Renee drove down the coastal highway, the wind whipping through her open windows, she reflected on the events at the dealership. It wasn't just a confrontation. It was a statement, a declaration of her worth, not just to those who underestimated her, but to herself. She had long since learned that true power came not from the symbols of status or wealth, but from knowing and standing firmly in one's own value. Today, she had reasserted that belief in a place that had tried to strip it from her. The silver Mercedes-AMG GT purred beneath her hands, a testament to her resilience and a subtle reminder of the journey she had taken to get here. But as the miles stretched before her, Renee felt her mind drift back to the other battles she'd fought. The silent wars waged in boardrooms, at dinner parties, and sometimes even in her own neighborhood. Her thoughts were interrupted by the familiar buzz of her phone, and she glanced down to see a call from Carla. Smiling, she answered, "Hey, Carla." "Girl, you left me hanging." Carla's voice filled with excitement and curiosity. "Did you get the car? And more importantly, did you put those smug salesmen in their place?" Renee chuckled, savoring the moment. "Oh, I got the car, and let's just say I had a few words with them. It was a lot." "I bet it was. I don't know why people think they can judge someone based on appearances alone," Carla huffed. "They don't know you or the mountains you've climbed to get where you are." Renee's smile faded slightly as memories flooded back. She thought about the years she'd spent proving herself, the late nights at university, the endless hours of work and study, and the sacrifices she'd made. "You're right, Carla. They don't know. But that's the thing about people like them. They don't care to know. They think they already have you figured out the moment they lay eyes on you. And that's their loss," Carla replied. "You know, you've got to tell this story. People need to hear it. They need to know they're not alone in facing this kind of treatment." Renee nodded, even though Carla couldn't see her. The idea resonated deeply. She had always believed in speaking out, in using her voice to bring light to injustices, big or small. Maybe this was the moment to share her story, not just to vent her frustrations, but to inspire others to stand up for themselves. As she continued down the highway, Renee's thoughts crystallized. She would turn this incident into something powerful, a message for anyone who had ever been judged unfairly. But first, she needed a moment to breathe, to let the weight of the day settle and the triumph sink in. That evening, she met Carla at their favorite restaurant by the water, a cozy place with warm lighting and the constant murmur of the waves in the background. They hugged tightly, and as they settled into their seats, Carla leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Okay, start from the beginning. I want every single detail." Renee laughed, taking a sip of her wine as she recounted the entire ordeal, from the dismissive glances to Jason's barely veiled condescension, all the way to her final confrontation with him and Stephen's intervention. Carla listened intently, her expressions ranging from outrage to amusement, occasionally interjecting with, "Oh no, he didn't. And you showed them, girl." When Renee finished, Carla sat back, shaking her head. "Honestly, Renee, it's their loss that they didn't see the amazing woman standing in front of them. But you know, this isn't just about them. It's about all the people out there who are treated this way every day, who don't have the chance or courage to speak up. You're their voice." Renee looked out at the ocean, her mind swirling with Carla's words. "You're right. It's just exhausting sometimes. I don't always want to be the one fighting these battles, you know." Carla reached across the table, taking her hand. "I know. But that's why you're so powerful, Renee. You fight because you know how it feels. And every time you do, you make it a little easier for someone else. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the waves roll in and out, carrying away the day's tension. The restaurant bustled around them, but they were in their own world, connected by the quiet strength they had both nurtured through years of shared struggles and triumphs. Renee sighed, a weight lifting off her shoulders. You know what, Carla? I'm going to do it. I'm going to share this story. Not to shame anyone, but to show that we can demand respect, that we don't have to settle for being dismissed or overlooked. Carla's face lit up with a proud smile. That's my girl. And if you need any help, you know I'm here for you. Renee spent the next few days crafting her story. She poured her heart into every word, recalling the feeling of being dismissed, the sting of condescension, and the strength she had to muster to stand tall. She shared it on her social media, and within hours, her post began to gain traction. Comments poured in, many from people who had experienced similar discrimination, others simply expressing admiration for her courage. One comment caught her eye. I work at a dealership, and reading this made me realize I've probably made the same assumptions without realizing it. Thank you for sharing this. It's a wake-up call. Renee felt a surge of hope. This was exactly what she had hoped to achieve. Not just validation for herself, but a shift in perspective, however small. Days later, she received a message from Stephen, the dealership's general manager. He thanked her for the powerful lesson, admitting that her words had spurred a change within his team. He was now implementing sensitivity training for all employees, aiming to create a culture of respect and inclusivity. Renee couldn't help but smile at the message. It was a small step, but it was a victory nonetheless. She had turned a moment of prejudice into an opportunity for growth, not just for herself, but for everyone involved. The next time she drove her silver Mercedes through the streets of Los Angeles, she felt a profound sense of pride. Her car was more than just a luxury vehicle. It was a testament to her journey, her resilience, and her refusal to be silenced or dismissed. As she continued her drive, she passed by the dealership, glancing at its shining glass windows. She knew she'd left her mark there, not just in the sales records, but in the minds and hearts of those who had witnessed her strength. And as for Jason, she would never know whether he had truly learned from the experience, but that no longer mattered. She had stood her ground, spoken her truth, and in doing so, inspired others to look beyond appearances. Renee's story was far from over. She knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more moments when she would have to remind the world of her worth. But for now, she was content, knowing that each battle she fought brought her one step closer to a world where respect was given freely, not earned through confrontation. Her phone buzzed with another message, and she glanced down to see Carla's name on the screen. You're a rock star. Let's celebrate soon. Renee grinned, her fingers tapping out a quick reply. Absolutely. This is only the beginning. As she drove on, her heart felt lighter, her spirit unbreakable, and her resolve stronger than ever. She was not just a woman in a luxury car. She was a force, a beacon, a reminder that dignity, once claimed, could never be taken away. And she knew that as long as she continued to drive forward, others would follow, finding their own strength in her journey. Ripple effects and unseen allies. The impact of Renee's story continued to ripple far beyond what she could have imagined. Over the following weeks, her post gained an unexpected amount of traction. Friends, acquaintances, and even complete strangers reached out to share their experiences, their support, and their gratitude. Renee had opened a door to a conversation that many had felt for too long was off-limits, and as more stories emerged, it was clear that her experience wasn't isolated. It was part of a larger issue woven into the fabric of the corporate world and beyond. One afternoon, as Renee sipped her coffee at a downtown cafe, she received an email that caught her eye. It was from a woman named Gloria Anderson, the CEO of a high-end fashion label based in New York. Dear Ms. Marshall, the email began, I came across your story, and was deeply moved. In my role, I often see women of color treated with implicit bias, especially in luxury spaces. I believe your voice can drive meaningful change. If you're interested, I'd love to discuss the possibility of you speaking at our annual conference on diversity and inclusion. I think you have the power to inspire real change in our industry. Renee felt a swell of excitement. This was exactly what she'd hoped her story would accomplish, an opportunity to spark a conversation in spaces that needed it most. She replied quickly, expressing her interest and gratitude, then called Carla to share the news. "Oh my gosh, Renee," Carla squealed on the other end of the line. "You're going to be amazing. This is what you were meant to do. People need to hear your story, and they need to hear it from you." A few days later, Renee received another unexpected message, this time from Stephen, the general manager of the dealership. His tone was respectful, almost apologetic. "Ms. Marshall, I wanted to personally thank you for the change you've inspired in our workplace. Since your visit, I've started implementing sensitivity and inclusivity training for our entire team. I'd also like to invite you to return to the dealership, this time as our guest, to see the changes for yourself. It's the least we can do to apologize for the way you were treated." Renee was taken aback. She hadn't expected to hear from Stephen again, and certainly not with such a message. His invitation felt genuine, and though part of her was tempted to decline, another part of her felt it was an opportunity to witness firsthand the impact of her actions. A few days later, Renee found herself back at the dealership. This time, as she entered, there was no sneering glance from the receptionist, no smug smiles from the sales team. Instead, a young woman with warm eyes greeted her with a polite, "Good afternoon, Ms. Marshall. How can we assist you today?" Stephen emerged from his office shortly afterward, his demeanor respectful and slightly nervous. "Ms. Marshall," he greeted, extending his hand. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. I thought it was important for you to see that we took your feedback seriously." Renee shook his hand, nodding. "I appreciate that, Mr. DeMarcus. It's not easy to admit mistakes, and it's even harder to make changes." They walked through the showroom together, Stephen explaining the new training modules they'd implemented and introducing her to a few members of the sales team, who each greeted her with professionalism and respect. Jason, the sales associate who had initially dismissed her, was noticeably absent, and Renee assumed he had either been transferred or let go. She was neither disappointed nor pleased by this fact. Instead, she felt a quiet sense of closure. As she left the dealership that afternoon, she felt an unexpected lightness. This was more than she could have hoped for, a real, tangible change sparked by a single moment of standing up for herself. And while the dealership was just one small corner of the world, it was proof that even a single voice could make a difference. Back in her office, Renee began preparing for her speaking engagement at the New York conference. She spent hours crafting her speech, determined to make every word count. She wanted to convey not just her personal story, but the broader message of resilience, the importance of self-worth, and the necessity of dismantling biases in every workplace. The day of the conference arrived, and Renee found herself standing in front of a packed room filled with business leaders, HR managers, and corporate executives. As she took the stage, she felt a rush of nerves but quickly steadied herself, her mind focused on the purpose that had brought her here. "Thank you for inviting me," she began, her voice strong and clear. "My name is Renee Marshall, and I'm here to talk about an experience that many of us have faced, but few of us are willing to discuss openly. I'm here to talk about implicit bias, prejudice, and the quiet ways they manifest in our daily interactions." She went on to recount her experience at the car dealership, the condescending remarks, the dismissive glances, and the subtle but unmistakable judgment. She described how she had nearly walked away, but something inside her compelled her to stay and assert her dignity. "What I faced that day was not an isolated incident," she continued. "It's part of a larger, systemic issue that permeates our society, especially in industries where wealth and status are assumed to belong to a select few. But I'm here to remind you that value doesn't come from skin color, gender, or any other external factor. It comes from within, from our abilities, our resilience, and our determination. As she spoke, Renee could see heads nodding in agreement, and in the audience, several people wiped tears from their eyes. Her words struck a chord, resonating with the hidden struggles of those who had faced similar biases. She knew she was not just speaking for herself. She was giving voice to countless others who had been dismissed or underestimated. After her speech, people approached her, sharing their own stories, expressing their admiration, and thanking her for her courage. Gloria Anderson, the CEO who had invited her, pulled her aside, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Renee, that was powerful," Gloria said. "We need more voices like yours in our industry. This is just the beginning. If you're willing, I'd love to collaborate on a series of workshops to bring this message to companies nationwide." Renee felt a thrill of excitement. This was beyond anything she had anticipated, a real opportunity to expand her impact and create lasting change. She agreed enthusiastically, knowing that this was her chance to help shape a future where respect and inclusivity were the norm, not the exception. As the conference ended and Renee made her way back to her hotel, she reflected on how far she had come. What had started as a frustrating experience in a car dealership had blossomed into a movement, a platform to champion the rights and dignity of others. She felt a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that her journey was no longer just about herself. It was about lifting up everyone who had ever felt marginalized or overlooked. That evening, Renee sat by the window of her hotel room, watching the city lights sparkle against the night sky. She called Carla, eager to share the day's events. "Carla, you won't believe what happened," she began, recounting the overwhelming response to her speech and the opportunity to lead diversity workshops. Carla's laughter echoed through the phone, full of pride. "I told you, Renee. This is just the start. You're unstoppable." Renee smiled, feeling the warmth of her friend's words. She knew she was ready to take on this new challenge, to continue her fight for a more inclusive world. As she ended the call, she glanced at her reflection in the window, her face illuminated by the glow of the city. She saw a woman who had faced down prejudice, who had reclaimed her dignity, and who now stood as a beacon of strength for others. And she knew that this was only the beginning of her journey. With a deep breath, Renee made a silent promise to herself and to everyone who would walk this path after her. She would continue to be their voice, their advocate, and their ally. She would continue to rise, not just for herself, but for all those who needed someone to remind them of their worth. And as she drifted off to sleep that night, she felt an unshakable peace, knowing she was right where she was meant to be. Empowerment, legacy, and lasting change. Months passed, and Renee's life had transformed in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her story of standing up to bias at the luxury car dealership became the foundation for something much larger, a movement that was inspiring others, creating meaningful discussions, and making lasting change in workplaces across the country. After her impactful conference speech in New York, she and Gloria Anderson, the CEO of the high-end fashion label, collaborated on a series of diversity and inclusivity workshops aimed at corporate leaders. They named the initiative Voices of Value. Their mission was clear: to change the culture in corporate spaces, dismantling unspoken biases, and creating environments where everyone, regardless of their background, felt valued and respected. Renee found herself on a whirlwind journey, traveling to major cities, speaking to rooms filled with CEOs, managers, and HR directors. Each workshop was an opportunity for Renee to share her story, but it was also a chance for attendees to confront their own biases, reflect on their interactions, and consider how they could foster a culture of inclusivity. Her workshops were unlike anything most participants had experienced. Rather than just presenting statistics and policies, Renee guided them through exercises that evoked empathy and self-reflection. She encouraged them to share their own experiences, sometimes sparking emotional confessions from participants who were finally coming to terms with the impact of their biases on others. One evening after a particularly powerful workshop in Chicago, a man in his 50s approached Renee. He had tears in his eyes, and his hands were shaking slightly as he introduced himself. "Ms. Marshall," he began, his voice raw with emotion. "I was just like that salesman. For years, I dismissed people without even realizing it. I thought I was fair, but I see now that I was making judgments without even knowing it. Your story opened my eyes, and I'm so sorry for all the times I may have hurt someone without realizing it." Renee placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Awareness is the first step," she said gently. "What matters now is what you choose to do with it. We all make mistakes, but we also all have the power to grow." As the man walked away, Renee felt a surge of fulfillment. This was the heart of her work, not to shame or blame, but to guide people toward understanding, empathy, and ultimately, change. Back in Los Angeles, Renee continued her work, now also consulting for companies that were genuinely committed to fostering inclusive work environments. Her reputation as a speaker, consultant, and advocate grew, and she was invited to be a keynote speaker at several major corporate and social justice conferences. She even made appearances on television, where she shared her story and her vision for a world where people's worth was measured by their integrity and abilities, not by superficial judgments. But beyond the public engagements and recognition, Renee also focused on grassroots change. She wanted to empower those who had been affected by discrimination to find their voices and reclaim their dignity. She collaborated with local nonprofits, helping young people from underrepresented backgrounds develop the skills and confidence to succeed in spaces where they might otherwise feel unwelcome. She held workshops at community centers, visited high schools, and even launched a mentorship program pairing young professionals with leaders who could offer them guidance, advice, and networking opportunities. One of her most memorable mentorship moments came when she met Mia, a recent college graduate who reminded Renee of her younger self. Mia was ambitious, bright, and eager to enter the corporate world, but she faced constant rejections in interviews. She confided in Renee that she felt invisible and discouraged, wondering if she'd ever get her chance to prove herself. Renee took Mia under her wing, helping her refine her resume, practice interview techniques, and most importantly, believe in her own worth. They met weekly, and Renee watched Mia's confidence grow steadily. One day, Mia called Renee with a mixture of disbelief and excitement in her voice. "I got the job," Mia exclaimed. "They said my confidence and professionalism really stood out. I don't think I could have done it without you, Renee." Renee's heart swelled with pride. "You did it, Mia. I just helped you see what was already there." As she hung up the phone, Renee knew that Mia would go on to make a difference in her own right, just as countless others were now inspired to do. One day, as Renee was preparing for a panel discussion, she received a call from an unexpected source, the luxury car dealership where her journey had begun. Stephen, the general manager, had stayed in touch occasionally, sending updates on the changes he'd implemented. But this call was different. "Renee," Stephen said, his voice hesitant but respectful, "I wanted you to be the first to know. After some long discussions with the team and the owners, we've decided to dedicate a scholarship program for underprivileged students who are pursuing degrees in business. We're calling it the Renee Marshall Scholarship Fund." Renee was speechless, a wave of emotion washing over her. She hadn't sought recognition or accolades, but to know that her actions had inspired something so impactful left her deeply moved. "That's incredible, Stephen," she managed, her voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you for honoring me in this way. I hope this scholarship helps young people realize that they belong in any room, any space, no matter what." "Your story inspired us all, Renee," he replied. "This is just one small way we can continue your work and keep the conversation going." As the years went on, Renee's life continued to be filled with purpose and passion. She had transformed her experience of discrimination into a platform for change, but she had also grown as a person, discovering strength and resilience she hadn't known she possessed. Through her workshops, mentorships, and advocacy, she became a beacon of hope and inspiration for countless individuals who had felt marginalized or unseen. In her own way, Renee had built a legacy, and though she knew that there was still much work to be done, she felt confident that she had played her part in pushing the world a little closer to justice, fairness, and unity. As she walked through a gallery one evening, a young girl approached her, shyly clutching the book. "Miss Marshall," she asked, her eyes wide with admiration, "you probably don't remember, but you came to my school a few years ago and told us to never let anyone make us feel small." Renee smiled, bending down to meet the girl's gaze. "I remember saying that. And it's true. No one can define your worth but you." The girl beamed, holding out her book for Renee to sign. As Renee signed her name, she wrote a small message beneath it: "Keep shining. Your light will lead the way." That night, as Renee returned home, she reflected on the journey that had started with a moment of humiliation and transformed into a mission of empowerment. She knew she would continue her work, guiding others, challenging biases, and opening doors for those who came after her. And as she drifted off to sleep, she felt a profound peace settle within her. She had taken the pain of her past and turned it into power, not just for herself, but for a future where everyone, regardless of who they were or where they came from, had the freedom to be seen, heard, and valued.